What if that old 20p coin sitting unnoticed in your change has a tiny detail that you've never thought to check?
Millions of these coins were made for everyday use, yet collectors still pay close attention to certain dates, varieties, and unusual features.
Welcome back to Change Your Life. Today's countdown features 4 United Kingdom 20 pence coins. 1996, no mint mark. 1993, no mint mark. 1983, no mint mark. 1982, no mint mark.
Struck by the Royal Mint at Lantricent in cupro-nickel, these classic British coins carry the distinctive Tudor Rose reverse design.
After years in circulation, many examples are dirty, scratched, worn, and heavily circulated. But don't let their condition fool you.
Collectors examine these coins for rare varieties, minting errors, unusual strikes, die differences, and other tiny characteristics that can make one example much more interesting than another. So before you spend an old 20p, turn it over and inspect it carefully.
Stay with us until the end, because the last coin may have the most intriguing detail of today's countdown. Now, let's uncover coin number 1. What if one of the most overlooked coins in your old change isn't actually as ordinary as it looks? Imagine finding a dirty British 20p at the bottom of an old drawer. The surface is scratched. The metal is dull. The Tudor Rose is worn.
And the Queen's portrait has been rubbed down by years of circulation.
Most people would look at it. See the date. 1996.
And spend it without another thought.
But before you do that, there's something you should know.
The 1996 British 20p had a circulation mintage of approximately 83,163,750 coins. That's considerably lower than the enormous 1982 issue, but it's still far too many for the date alone to make an ordinary circulated coin extremely rare.
And that's where the real investigation begins. Because the question isn't, is every 1996 20p worth a fortune? The real question is, what exactly makes one 1996 20p different from another? Look at the reverse. The first thing you'll notice is the unmistakable crown Tudor Rose. This wasn't just a decorative choice.
The Tudor Rose reverse was designed by William Gardner and was used on the standard British 20p from 1982 until 2008.
Look carefully around the rose. You'll find 20 pence. The date 1996.
And the small designer initials
WG. That tiny detail is easy to overlook, especially on a heavily circulated example. But that's exactly why collectors examine old coins under magnification. Sometimes the smallest details tell the biggest story. This side gives us another clue. The 1996 20p carries Raphael Makhlouf's portrait of Queen Elizabeth II. The Royal Mint records Makhlouf's portrait on the 20p from 1985 through 1997. So your 1996 coin belongs to the final years of that portrait era. And this gives us a fascinating comparison. Your 1982 and 1983 20p coins belong to the earlier Arnold Machin portrait period. Your 1993 and 1996 coins belong to the Raphael Makhlouf era. Then in 1998, Britain moved to the Ian Rank Broadley portrait. So 4 old 20p dates can actually tell a much bigger story about changing British coinage. Don't assume the 1996 date automatically means rarity. The Royal Mint's mintage figure tells us that more than 83 million circulation examples were produced. That means your heavily worn example should not be presented as a guaranteed high-value coin. Instead, collectors look at the individual characteristics. That's where things get interesting. Check the portrait, Tudor Rose, crown, lettering, date, room, and the overall strike. You're looking for something genuinely different from the normal coin. This is one of the biggest traps in online coin collecting. A scratch can look like doubling. A dent can look like a striking problem. A worn letter can look like a missing detail. A dark surface can look like unusual metal. But a coin that's been circulating for decades can experience an enormous amount of damage. So before calling something a rare error, ask, could this have happened after the coin left the Royal Mint? If the answer is yes, slow down. Compare it with a normal 1996 example. That's how you separate an interesting possibility from ordinary circulation damage. The standard British 20p is approximately 21.4 millimeters diameter, 5.0 grams weight, 1.7 millimeters thick. Cupro-nickel, 84% copper/16% nickel, with a plain edge and the familiar seven-sided shape. Those measurements give you a baseline. And that baseline is important because your coin is described as dirty, worn, and heavily circulated. Its appearance may be dramatically different from a fresh example. But that doesn't automatically mean something unusual happened during minting. There's another reason people can become confused when searching for the value of a 1996 20p. A separate 1996 silver anniversary collection included a silver-proof Tudor Rose 20p with an issue limit of 15,000. That's completely different from the ordinary cupro-nickel circulation coin. So if you search online and suddenly see a 1996 20p associated with a much higher price, stop. Check what type of coin you're actually looking at. A limited silver-proof and a dirty circulated cupro-nickel 20p should never be treated as the same thing. That distinction alone can completely change the research. If your coin is dirty, leave it dirty. If it's dark, leave it alone. Don't polish the Tudor Rose. Don't use vinegar. Don't use metal cleaner. Don't scrape the surface. Don't try to make it shine. Your first job is not to make the coin beautiful. Your first job is to preserve the evidence. Take clear photographs. Measure it. Weigh it. Inspect it under magnification. And document anything that looks genuinely unusual. The fascinating thing about this coin isn't that every 1996 20p is secretly worth thousands. It isn't. The fascinating thing is that one tiny seven-sided coin can contain so many layers of history. A 1996 date. A Mackloff royal portrait. A William Gardner Tudor Rose. A cupro-nickel body. And decades of circulation wear. And then there's the separate silver-proof issue that can easily confuse inexperienced searches. So the next time you find a worn 1996 20p, don't just look at the number. Look at the whole coin. Because the difference between an ordinary coin and a genuinely interesting one isn't always obvious from across the room. Sometimes, you need to turn it over. Bring it under the light. And look much, much closer. And that's where the real hunt begins. Now that we've identified the 1996 20p, it's time to answer the question almost every coin hunter wants to know. Could this worn little coin actually be worth more than 20 pence? The honest answer is possibly, but the date alone isn't enough. And that's exactly what makes this coin interesting. The Royal Mint records approximately 83,163,750 circulation 20p coins dated 1996. That's a substantial production number, so an ordinary, heavily circulated example isn't automatically a rare coin. But collectors don't stop at the mintage figure. They inspect the individual coin. Your example is described as dirty, worn, and heavily circulated. That matters. Years of circulation can flatten the highest points of the design and introduce scratches, dents, and surface marks. So don't compare your coin with a brilliant uncirculated example and expect the same value. A collector will examine surface preservation, remaining detail, rim condition, scratches and marks, overall wear, and whether the coin has been cleaned. The better preserved the original surface, generally the more collectible the piece can become. But remember, cleaning a dirty coin doesn't make it uncirculated. It can actually make the surface less desirable. There is something strangely easy to miss about an old British 20p. You can hold it in your hand, look directly at it, and still fail to notice the detail that makes it historically interesting. That's especially true with the 1993 United Kingdom 20p. It doesn't have a dramatic appearance. It isn't covered in an obvious mint error. And in the dirty, heavily circulated condition we're examining, it can look like nothing more than another forgotten piece of pocket change. But look at the date. 1993. Then look at the portrait. And suddenly, the coin begins telling a different story. The 20p had already been circulating for more than a decade by this point, having been introduced in 1982. Its distinctive seven-sided shape and Tudor Rose reverse had already become familiar across Britain. But the coin in your hand belongs to a completely different portrait generation from the first 20p coins. And that's the first clue. Flip the 1993 coin over. You're looking at Queen Elizabeth II as portrayed by Raphael Makhlouf. The Royal Mint's design records show that the Makhlouf portrait was used on the British 20p from 1985 until 1997. That means 1993 sits right inside this portrait era. Now compare it with a 1982 or 1983 20p. The difference becomes obvious. Those early coins use Arnold Mackin's portrait. Your 1993 example uses Raphael Makhlouf's. Same denomination. Same seven-sided shape. Same basic reverse design. But an entirely different portrait. And that's something most people never stop to notice. Now study the reverse. The crown Tudor Rose dominates the center. This design was created by William Gardner. The Royal Mint confirms that the Tudor Rose reverse remained on the standard 20p for decades, from 1982 through 2008. Look at the rose carefully. Look at each petal. Look at the crown. Look at the lettering. And then look at the tiny designer initials. On a fresh coin, these details can be surprisingly sharp. On your heavily circulated example, they may almost disappear. But that doesn't mean the coin was struck incorrectly. It may simply mean the coin has lived a long life. Now comes the part that can make collectors curious. The Royal Mint records approximately 123,123,750 circulation 20p coins dated 1993. That's certainly a significant production figure. But it also tells us something important. 1993 isn't automatically rare simply because it's an older coin. More than 123 million circulation pieces were produced. So if your coin is dirty, worn and heavily circulated, the date by itself isn't enough to justify a dramatic value claim. Instead, we need to examine the individual coin. Place the coin under a bright light. Don't start with the price. Start with identification. Check. 1993. Then Queen Elizabeth II portrait. Then Tudor Rose. Then 20 pence. Then the rim. You're building a picture of what the coin should look like. Only after that should you investigate anything unusual. The standard British 20p is approximately 21.4 millimeters across, 5 grams in weight, and 1.7 millimeters thick. It's made from cupro-nickel, approximately 84% copper and 16% nickel, with a plain edge. This information becomes useful when a coin looks strange. For example, if you think your 1993 coin might be unusual, don't rely on appearance alone. Measure it. Weigh it. Compare it. And document what you find. Here's where many people make a mistake. They see a damaged coin and call it a rare error. Imagine the edge has a deep scratch, or the rose appears flattened, or a letter seems incomplete, or the surface has a strange dark mark. None of those things automatically proves a mint error. A coin can spend decades rubbing against other coins, being dropped, handled, carried in pockets and exposed to different environments. That can produce some incredibly convincing damage. So ask yourself, Was this feature created when the coin was struck? That's the question that matters.
Because your coin is heavily circulated, inspect the raised portions first.
The Queen's portrait. The crown. The Tudor Rose. The lettering. The rim.
These areas receive repeated contact during circulation.
If the highest points are simply flattened, that's consistent with wear.
But if you find an unusual feature that doesn't look like ordinary abrasion,
that's when you should stop and investigate. Take a macro photograph. Compare it with a normal 1993 coin. And don't alter the surface. This coin is already described as dirty and heavily circulated. Leave it that way. Don't polish it. Don't scrub it. Don't use vinegar. Don't use metal cleaner. Don't scrape the rose. Don't sand the surface. Cleaning doesn't magically transform an ordinary circulated coin into a valuable one.
In fact, aggressive cleaning can make a collectible coin less desirable.
Preserve what you found. The original condition is evidence.
For a normal, heavily circulated 1993 cupro-nickel 20p, the answer is generally not because of the date alone. Its circulation mintage was approximately 123.1 million, so scarcity isn't enough by itself to create a major premium.
But that's not the end of the story.
A particular example can become more interesting if it has
a genuine min error, a documented variety, exceptional preservation, or another characteristic recognized by collectors.
That's why two coins with the same date can have completely different levels of interest.
Think about the timeline. The 20p arrives in Britain in 1982.
The early coins carry the Mackin portrait.
Then the portrait changes. By 1993, you're firmly inside the Macloff era.
The Tudor Rose remains unchanged.
The denomination remains seven-sided.
And millions of these coins continue moving silently through everyday British life. Your particular 1993 example may have passed through countless hands before ending up where you found it.
That's what makes old circulating coins fascinating. They're not museum pieces that stayed untouched behind glass. They're objects that actually participated in everyday history. In a way, examine it one more time. Look at the date. Look at the portrait. Look at the rose. Look at the crown. Look at the lettering. Look at the edge.
Then compare it with another 1993 example.
If everything matches, you may simply have a normal circulated 20p. And that's perfectly fine. Because you've still identified a genuine piece of Britain's decimal coin history. But if something doesn't match, don't guess. Document it. Research it. And let the evidence decide. Because the biggest mistake in coin collecting isn't overlooking a fortune.
It's creating a rarity where none exists.
Now let's get to the question that makes people stop scrolling. Could this old 1993 20p actually be worth more than its face value? The answer depends on something much more important than the year. It depends on the individual coin.
The Royal Mint records approximately 123,123,750 circulation 20p coins dated 1993. That's a substantial number, so the ordinary circulated version isn't automatically a major rarity simply because it is decades old.
But that's where the investigation gets more interesting. Because two 1993 coins can have the same date and still be very different from a collector's point of view. Take your heavily circulated 1993 20p. Don't ask about the price yet. First, inspect the surface. Is the portrait sharp? Are the letters complete? Does the Tudor Rose still have clear petals? Is the crown well defined? Is the rim intact? These details tell you about the coin's condition. And condition matters.
A coin that has spent decades in circulation will naturally show more wear than one that was carefully stored. The 1993 20p belongs to the Raphael Macloff portrait era, which ran from 1985 to 1997 for the 20p denomination.
That makes the date particularly useful when you're studying the progression of British coin portraits. Place it beside your 1982 or 1983 example. You'll see the earlier Arnold Machin portrait. Now place it beside your 1996. The portrait style matches the same Macloff period. And this gives your 4-coin collection a visual timeline. Machin Macloff. Without needing a history book. Turn the coin back over. The crown Tudor Rose is still there. This design was created by William Gardner and was used on the standard 20p until the redesign in 2008. Now look at your worn example. Some petals may be weak. The lettering may be flattened. The tiny designer details may be difficult to see. But don't immediately assume anything is missing. Circulation work can remove the finest raised details first. That's why comparing the coin with a normal example is so important. Imagine finding a strange line across the Tudor Rose. You might think, this must be a mint error. Not necessarily. That line could have been created by another coin. Or by contact with a hard surface. Or during years of circulation. The same applies to scratches, dents, flattened rims, gouges, discoloration, and worn lettering. A genuine mint error requires evidence that the feature originated during production. So don't let an unusual-looking mark automatically convince you that you found a rarity. A normal British 20p is approximately 21.4 millimeters, 5 grams, 1.7 millimeters thick, and made from 84% copper and 16% nickel cupro-nickel. If your coin looks different, check the measurements before making assumptions. And remember that cheap household scales aren't always precise enough for serious numismatic testing. A tiny variation doesn't automatically mean anything unusual. For a normal, dirty and heavily circulated 1993 20p, don't expect the date alone to produce a dramatic value. The large circulation mintage makes that unrealistic. However, a particular example can become more interesting if it has a verified mint error, a recognized variety, excellent preservation, or another documented collectible characteristic. That's why serious collectors don't simply ask, what is a 1993 20p worth? They ask, what type of 1993 20p is this, and what condition is it in? That's a much better question. Your coin is already dirty. That doesn't mean you should clean it. Don't use vinegar, metal polish, abrasive paste, scrubbing brushes, or anything designed to make the surface shine. A cleaned coin can have altered surfaces that are less desirable to collectors. Instead, preserve the coin exactly as you found it. Take clear photographs. Use good lighting. Record the weight. Measure the diameter. Then investigate. Put your 4 coins together. 1996. Approximately 83.16 million circulation coins. 1993. Approximately 123.12 million. 1983. Approximately 158.46 million. 1982. Approximately 740.82 million. Now something becomes obvious. The production numbers are very different. But none of these figures, by themselves, prove that a heavily circulated coin is extremely valuable. That's an important lesson. Mintage is a clue, not a guaranteed price tag. Before spending your 1993 20p, take a few seconds. Check. 1993 date. Macloff portrait. Tudor Rose. William Gardner initials. Weight. Diameter. Rim. Surface condition. Then inspect anything that looks genuinely unusual. If it matches the normal design, you've identified a legitimate piece of British decimal history. If something doesn't match, that's when you investigate further. Don't clean it. Don't alter it. Don't immediately trust an online price. Document first. Research second. Value comes last. The 1993 20p isn't fascinating because every example is secretly worth a fortune. It's fascinating because it captures Britain in the middle of a major portrait era. A 7-sided cupro-nickel coin. A crown Tudor Rose. A Makhlouf portrait. A 1993 date. And decades of everyday circulation. Millions of people probably handled coins like this without ever wondering about their history. But today, you're looking at one differently. You're not just seeing 20 pence. You're seeing a tiny surviving piece of Britain's everyday past. And sometimes, that's exactly what makes an ordinary coin worth a second look. What if the second chapter of Britain's 20p story is hiding in a coin that looks almost completely ordinary? Take an old 1983 British 20p. It's dirty. The surface is scratched. The Tudor Rose is worn. The Queen's portrait has lost some of its original sharpness. And after decades of circulation, it may look like the kind of coin nobody would ever bother saving. But there is one reason this date deserves a closer look. 1983 was only the second year of the 20p coin. The denomination itself had only been introduced in 1982, and the Royal Mint describes the distinctive 7-sided shape as a deliberate design choice to help people distinguish the coin from others and to work reliably in vending machines. So when you hold a 1983 20p, you're looking at a coin from the very beginning of Britain's 20p era. But here's the part that makes this date more interesting. The Royal Mint's figures show approximately 158,463,000 circulation 20p coins dated 1983. That sounds like an enormous number. And it is. So let's make something clear right now. 1983 does not automatically mean rare. A coin isn't valuable simply because it is old. And it isn't automatically valuable because its mintage is lower than another year. Before the British 20p became a familiar 7-sided coin, there was a moment when the denomination didn't exist at all. Then, on June 9, 1982, Britain introduced it. And suddenly, a completely new coin began appearing in pockets, purses, tills and vending machines across the country. That makes the 1982 United Kingdom 20p different from every later date in one very simple way. It's the beginning of the series. Today, however, the coin can look anything but special. The example we're examining is dirty, worn, and heavily circulated. The surface may be covered in scratches. The raised details may have become soft. The Tudor Rose might look tired. And the Queen's portrait may have lost much of its original definition. After more than 4 decades? That's exactly what you'd expect from a coin that spent its life in circulation. But don't put it back into your change just yet. Because this is where the story gets interesting. When the 20p was introduced in 1982, Britain wasn't simply adding another denomination. The Royal Mint was creating a coin that had to be immediately recognizable. That's one reason the 7-sided shape became such an important part of its identity. The shape was designed with a constant breadth, meaning the coin could still be handled and recognized easily despite having 7 sides. It also helped distinguish the 20p from other coins and made it practical for machines. And that unusual shape has survived for decades. Now turn the coin over. The portrait staring back at you is Queen Elizabeth II, created by sculptor Arnold Machin. The Machin portrait was used on the 20p from 1982 through 1984. So the 1982 example represents the very first portrait version of the denomination. Look closely at the Queen's head. She's wearing the Girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara. And that tiara has a remarkable royal connection. The Royal Mint explains that Queen Mary gave it to Princess Elizabeth as a wedding gift in 1947. So hidden inside this little piece of pocket change is a connection between British coinage and royal history. The reverse gives you the unmistakable symbol of the early 20p. The crown Tudor Rose. The design was created by William Gardner. Look at the rose. Look at the crown. Look at the lettering. Then look at the date. 1982.
This was the original year of the design's appearance on the new 20p denomination, and the Tudor Rose remained the standard reverse for decades. Here's where some people get carried away. The Royal Mint records approximately 740,815,000 circulation 20p coins dated 1982.
That's enormous. So while 1982 is historically important as the first year, the date alone doesn't make every 1982 20p rare. That's an important distinction.
If you're holding a dirty, heavily circulated example, don't assume you've discovered a fortune simply because it says 1982.
Instead, start examining the actual coin. Look at the date. Then move your eyes around the coin. Is the design normal? Are the letters correctly formed? Does the rose look properly struck? Is the rim complete? Are there unusual raised features? Is anything actually different from another 1982 20p? This is where a magnifying glass becomes more useful than a price chart. Because you're not looking for a big number. You're looking for evidence. A heavily circulated 1982 coin can look strange. That's normal.
A scratch might run through the portrait.
A dent might distort part of the rim. The rose can appear flattened. The lettering can look weak.
None of these automatically proves a mint error.
The question is, was the feature created at the mint or during the coin's decades in circulation?
That distinction can make all the difference.
The standard 20p measures approximately 21.4 millimeters and weighs around 5 grams. It's approximately 1.7 millimeters thick and made from 84% copper and 16% nickel cupro-nickel. The 7-sided shape is another easy identification clue.
So if someone hands you an old British coin and you're unsure what you're looking at,
the shape, size, design and date can quickly establish the basics.
This particular example is already dirty and heavily circulated.
Leave it alone. Don't polish it. Don't scrub it. Don't use vinegar. Don't use toothpaste. Don't scrape the surface. And don't try to make the coin shine. A cleaned coin isn't automatically a more valuable coin.
In fact, aggressive cleaning can permanently alter the surface and hurt its collector appeal.
If you're investigating it, preserve it exactly as you found it. There are several things worth investigating.
The first-year status makes it historically significant.
The Mackin portrait identifies its early place in the series.
The Tudor Rose connects it to the original reverse design. And a genuine mint error or recognized variety could potentially make an individual example more interesting.
But don't confuse historical importance with guaranteed monetary value.
A normal, worn 1982 20p remains a normal circulated coin unless there is something else to distinguish it.
Think about where this coin began. In 1982, the 20p was brand new. Nobody knew it would still be instantly recognizable decades later. Nobody knew the 7-sided shape would become one of Britain's most familiar coin designs. And nobody carrying that first 20p through a shop knew that collectors decades later would study its portrait, reverse, dates and production history. Your worn example has survived all of that. The scratches aren't necessarily evidence of rarity. They're evidence of use. The faded details aren't necessarily a mint mistake. They're evidence of time. And the date, 1982, is the part that takes us right back to the beginning. Give the coin one final inspection. Check the date, portrait, Tudor Rose, crown, lettering, rim, and weight. Then compare it with a normal 1982 example. If everything matches, you've probably got a normal circulated first-year 20p. And that's still a fascinating piece of British decimal history. But if something genuinely doesn't match, that's when you stop. Take photographs. Record the measurements. Preserve the coin. And investigate before making any claim about rarity or value. Because sometimes the most important discovery isn't finding a coin worth a fortune. It's discovering that a coin you've ignored for years has been telling you a story the entire time. And this one begins in 1982. The year Britain's 20p was born.